Hi, everyone. Welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. My guest today is Andy Fremier. Andy is Deputy Executive Director for Operations with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. In this role, he also serves as Deputy Executive Director of the Bay Area Toll Authority, or BATA, supervising administration of all toll revenue from the Bay Area's 7 state-owned bridges. This revenue is used to fund day-to-day operation, maintenance, and administration of the bridge. Andy is a former chair of the California Toll Operators Committee, a current board member of IBTTA, and a board member of ITS America. Andy, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
Good morning, Pat. Thank you for the invite.
You bet. Well, as we often do, I want to do a shout out today for our mugs. I have this beautiful mug from the Transportation Corridor Agencies from our president, Samuel Johnson, and thanks especially to Stephanie Eddy for sending this to me. And we also have a mug from the Delaware River Joint Toll Bridge Commission, or as the locals say, Dr. J. Thanks to Chip Stracalini for sending the mug. I have a backlog of a few mugs right now that have arrived at my office in recent weeks, so I'll be revealing those to you in the coming sessions. We are taking your questions and comments. We encourage you to use the chat function on your screen to ask questions, and we would ask you to set your chat function to all panelists and attendees. The default setting is all panelists, but if you'd like others to be able to see your question, set your chat function to all panelists and attendees. Well, Andy, it's great to have you on the show, and let's get right into it. Let's talk a little bit about your MTC portfolio. There's a lot more to your job than simply overseeing the state's 7 toll bridges. You're involved in transit, the Clipper Transit Fare Card Program, the Bay Area's Express Lane Network, the 511 Traveler Information System. Talk to us a little bit about your portfolio and how it's been affected by COVID-19.
Well, sure, Pat. It is a broad portfolio, but we do try to think about it in a way that is dealing with really this mobility as a service and how can we provide the tools that are important to help people get around so that businesses do well and so that citizens can get around the region. The San Francisco Bay Area has about 7 million people in it. We're challenged with a really complicated governance structure. There's 101 cities and 9 counties. We have 20 plus transit operators. We have 5 or 6 different toll operators. You mentioned the Bay Area Toll Authority, which is right in the middle of all of that. And then we also have this relationship with the California Department of Transportation as really a joint venture partner managing the bridge program, which delivers, as you mentioned, a lot of the rehabilitation work, but it also provides a considerable amount of revenue for all of our transit investments. The San Francisco Bay Area has invested heavily in transit. And has been a majority of our revenue goes to transit development and operations. And that's been a standard bearer for the San Francisco Bay Area for many decades. So when the COVID pandemic hit and everybody stayed home, we really saw some dramatic changes. Obviously around the nation, it's been repeated, but it was very hard hit in the San Francisco Bay Area. We initially saw a loss of transit ridership in the 90–95% range, which is just amazing. And the bridge revenue and the bridge traffic went down over 50% on all bridges, including the Golden Gate Bridge. So we've really had to do, as other folks have done, try to figure out how to claw back properly such that we can maintain the services, first of all, for the essential workers that are required, but also for the returning traffic that is coming with industry as it returns and as the various counties open up. One of the other challenges we've had, which I'm sure is also played across the nation, is we have 9 separate counties. They have 9 different public health organizations that run them. A few of the cities, Berkeley included, has its own public health authority. So in terms of trying to find solutions that work, you really have to navigate the county boundaries, which is pretty ridiculous when you think about the spread of this particular virus. So, it's added to its challenges. I'm following the rest of the country to see what folks are doing, but we're trying to follow suit and create an opportunity to bring things back in a measured way so that we have a safe environment for people to get back on to more high density travel, like transit, van pools, carpools, et cetera, e-bikes.
When we've talked in the past, you mentioned to me something called the Loma Prieta Playbook, which refers to the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area. Most of us remember this because it happened during Game 3 of the World Series between the Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants. So this Loma Prieta Playbook, it sounds to me like it's sort of the expedited way that the Bay Area responded with its rebuilding program. Tell us more about that.
Well, sure. First of all, I got to tell the audience I'm a diehard Giants fan, so I don't really appreciate references to the 1989 series. But we had some success later on, so that's good. Well, the purpose of the Loma Prieta Playbook was really taking a page out of Caltrans's book. And when the earthquake happened, we lost the Bay Bridge, which is the main artery for transportation in the Bay Area, just by far and above the most traveled bridge in the region. And it was immediately taken out of service. And yet the industry still had to kind of step up. People still needed to get around. So almost overnight, Caltrans striped additional lane capacity for some of the bridge approaches that were complementing the Bay Bridge from the north or from the south. They increased the capacity of several ramps, again, just through striping and closing on ramps that made individual merges hard. And they kind of asked permission afterwards, right? They didn't worry too much about permits. They didn't really get a lot of public information, but they went out and did some things that really helped move traffic in a way that was complementary to the effect of the earthquake. And I think it provided some real good solutions that frankly, some of them are still in place today. And so that's the approach that we're trying to take in today's adventure, because as we're seeing probably across the nation, our traffic is rebounding much faster than anybody anticipated. In addition, the transit ridership is still down. So those additional transit trips that were being taken are now in a lot of single occupancy vehicles, which has created a real effect of congestion in a hurry. And as we've talked about in the past, a few percentage points of mode shift makes a big difference, both in the positive and the negative. And we do anticipate that by Labor Day of this year, we're going to be beyond capacity in terms of the number of cars on the road. Even if the number of people aren't moving around the Bay Area quite the same way, we believe they're going to be in cars. So what we're trying to do is partner with our various governance committees that are out there and take a brand new look at transit to see if there's efficiencies that we can put into the transportation system in transit that might consolidate some of the efforts of our smaller operators, really try to maintain some level of coordination as we always do for the timing of when the transit trips, get to stations, which is complicated because the capacity of these transit facilities are, about 1/3 of what they're built for. So 3 buses replace 1. And that's really requiring us to think about the landscape very differently, to see if we can put some near-term paint jobs on the street that maintain that capacity and build up to congestion as opposed to knocking down congestion. And so we're trying to look at creative ideas that don't require big permits, that don't require a lot of public discussion. They're designed to maintain the free flow or reliable flow of transportation, whether it be cars or carpools or transit, so that we have an opportunity to build back properly and be ready for the economy turning back on.
We are taking your questions and comments. My guest today is Andy Fremier. He's the Deputy Executive Director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in San Francisco and also of the Bay Area Toll Authority. Andy, when self-quarantine began across the US in March, you, BATA, along with many other toll agencies across the country, suspended cash collection and made a nearly overnight switch to electronic tolling or all electronic tolling for reasons of social distancing. it seemed like the plan to switch to AET was to have taken place in the mid 2020s, but now conversion to AET has taken on a different light. It's an opportunity to face a long-term challenge in a new way. Tell us more about that.
Well, sure. You know, when you think of our system, and I mentioned it early on, this joint venture relationship with the state of California, it makes our operations complicated. So the toll collectors that we have in the toll booths today are Caltrans employees. So they're not directly my responsibility, but obviously we operate the system. We pay for the toll collectors in the end, and we also provide all of the resources needed to keep them operating properly. So when it came time to talk about taking the toll collectors out, not only for their safety, but also for the safety of the public, we really had to have a significant engagement with the state of California to navigate it properly. And so that whole orchestration of removing the collectors from the booth, you know, required multiple weeks of activity to prepare for it so that we had proper signing and public information out. Luckily, we've done quite a bit of investment in the all electronic environment. So our structure allowed for the traffic to go cashless immediately without it being a problem in terms of creating, capturing the tour, the toll revenue tour. So the challenge really had been in the setup. When we got to the point of removing the booths, removing the collectors, it went very smoothly, and the people in the Bay Area really got a hold of it. You know, there's, I think, a lot of trepidation about experience that slows some of our actions down as bureaucrats, and waiting to make sure that we're carefully managing maybe the lowest common denominator of the public is one of our biggest challenges. So we worked on you know, the idea of removing the collectors in an orderly way, and then really tried to fashion an approach that looked at our plan to go to all electronic tolling. As you mentioned, in 2019, our board approved a transition to all electronic tolling. We were going to gradually transition all of our bridges, one bridge at a time, to get to the point where we were all electronic tolled in 2025 or 2026. But the opportunity that we've seen here is we probably don't have to wait anywhere near that long. And that's got a lot of benefits. One, it shrinks the length of time that your resources are tied to the transition. It also, I think, requires you to maybe take a little bit more risk than you ordinarily would in order to meet the challenge. And I think that that's healthy. It makes you really take a look at your practices. We are fighting some challenges, though. It's very difficult in the California legal environment to deal with some of the restrictions that are on invoicing and toll changes and the discussion of whether it's a tax or a fee. And so the challenges are pretty significant for us to really convert quickly. Our contractor, Conduent, is working well with us. But you know, you can't make a mistake as you transition, and we don't have the ability to invoice currently in our system. It's unfortunate. It's one of the lessons I think I've learned is it would have been nice to be prepared for this earlier, at least in the back office, but that was a choice that BATA made very slowly, I think. But what we've seen is we don't need to take 5 or 6 years. We will likely bring the collectors back, hopefully soon, because that's the fastest, safest way to collect the revenue. And that revenue is extremely important for the Bay Area economy and keeping things moving. But we do believe that in a year or so, we should be able to do a much greater transition. And frankly, one of the lessons we learned that was most glaring was this adaptation of the people to be able to handle it without confusion. And our concern always has been in the long run that the Bay Bridge, which takes up to 250 to 300,000 cars a day, would really be our tough nut to crack. And we would have to do that at the very end of the transition. It's looking like now that that won't be the problem. And so we are very excited about moving forward and getting into the environment that really is designed to make the cashless transaction the way of the future. In all aspects. You know, we have our Clipper fare card that we run. So collecting fares is touchless. Getting collectors out of the booths is a public safety improvement for them in particular, but also for the traveling public. So this opportunity that has been created by the pandemic, we want to take advantage of and make that conversion happen in near time and not in the long term. think you're on mute, Pat.
You've talked about the rapid expansion of transit, and we have a question from Tim Stewart, or I should say rapid growth of traffic in the region, sort of as we phase out of, we move into the early phases of returning to work, et cetera. Tim Stewart from E470 has a question. When you are looking at adding capacity on the existing facilities, are you changing lane widths through striping? Are you using peak period shoulder lanes? And do you have federal or state oversight of these decisions?
Well, Tim, that's a really good question. I have to start out first by reminding folks we're in the San Francisco Bay Area. We don't build a lot of highways. So the idea that we're going to provide capacity for single occupancy vehicles is not what we're challenged with. In fact, we probably are going to take the opportunity to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make high occupancy travel still the preferred choice, which is the new challenge. But what we are trying to do is to make sure that our HOV lanes or our high occupancy toll lanes are maintained well. So we're addressing capacity questions. There was a lot of concern early on that if people aren't willing to get in carpools, why are we keeping the carpool lanes open? And we looked at opportunities potentially when the traffic was down to do some really exciting things like the cities have done, where you maybe give some of the highway capacity, frankly, to bikes and peds. But what we saw very quickly in a matter of weeks was that was just not going to be available. So most of our effort, Tim, has actually been on trying to maintain that high occupancy access so that when buses are safe, when van pools return, when carpools return, that we will provide them the opportunity to get clear travel through plazas and approaches. And that's really the game plan for us.
Andy, here's another question from Madeline Horman. She says, after the Loma Prieta earthquake, eventually the Embarcadero was removed at the behest of residents. Despite substantial opposition from many bureaucrats, this turned out to be a boon for the residents and the economy. In terms of new mobility, are you getting active participation from residents, and in particular underserved, economically challenged populations, for their ideas for solutions, rather than trying to dictate it from planning organizations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, just reminding folks, the San Francisco Bay Area, we do pay attention to those things quite a bit. And I did have a relationship with the Embarcadero. I was involved in removing it back in the day. And I'll tell you, it was the best thing that ever happened in downtown San Francisco. It opened up the waterfront. The waterfront is just a mecca for mobility options that are not vehicles. It'd be really nice to get rid of the cars on the road if you could. But what we do see there is the willingness of people to get onto alternative transportation modes like bikes, in particular the e-bike, which we believe is a game changer. We've also really tried to deal with equity in this environment. It's another one of those opportunities where things have happened so quickly that we've been willing to take some chances on things that were ideas for a long time. So we're about to turn on what we call the Clipper Start program, which provides a means-based discount on most of our transit operations. That's going to be through a subsidy from MTC and the transit operators. When the idea was hatched a couple of years ago, it's been talked about for at least a decade, there was only 4 of our major transit operators that were willing to make the investment in the equity question for means-based. And with the event of the pandemic, they're all knocking on our Clipper door, trying to figure out how can we get all systems in that environment. So we are looking very much at having a means-based program in transit stood up by early next month, July, with the idea that by the end of the calendar year, we'll have all of our transit operators participating in a means-based program. The interesting part, though, in terms of what we learned in standing up the program, is we think we have an opportunity in the tolled environment to do something as well. So we're trying now to investigate how to quickly turn on what we would call a fast track start operation that's going to pilot some means-based discussion in express lanes that are operated by MTC. Now, that's a challenge, right? Because operationally, you don't want to give away that capacity. On the other hand, the serious nature and the amount of people that really need to get around the bay, either in their car or in transit, and are very much dependent on other sources of revenue beyond what they can generate through income. We need to find a way to keep them engaged in the community so that they are participating. And so it's been exciting from that standpoint that we've really been able to turn some corners quickly in the equity environment. And it does come from a lot of public discussion. We've got multiple task forces, I mentioned, that are looking at the current problem that we're in right now. And they're trying to figure out ways that we can make sure we are thinking about the customer and thinking about the individual when we make some of these decisions and improvements.
My guest today is Andy Fremier. He's the Deputy Executive Director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Bay Area Toll Authority in San Francisco. A question from Rush Wicks. What are some takeaway lessons from the construction of the replacement east span of the Oakland Bay Bridge?
That's great. If I could just give the audience a 1 second, my colleague George would like to get in and he's scratching at the door. So hang on a minute. Well, George disappeared. Sorry about that.
We have many different colleagues these days, don't we, Andy?
Yes, we do. You know, the Bay Bridge project taught us a lot of lessons. And I have said many times that one of the best things that happened to us happened very late in the development of the project. So in 2004, Caltrans sort of ran out of money and was not able to finish the signature span. In order to solve the problem, the Bay Area Toll Authority, Caltrans, and the California Transportation Commission were ordered by state law to create really a joint venture to operate the remainder of the program. It gave BATA more responsibility in collecting all the revenue on the bridges. Prior to that time, we only did part of the revenue collection. That gave us more bonding capacity. We had a required Brown Act meeting that we talked about the project as we went through it. And the exciting part of that development, this Toll Bridge Oversight Committee, that was really the joint venture of a lot of the state transportation agencies, both locally and the state transportation funding sources. We got together and really, I think changed the paradigm for how you deliver projects. It was delivered at the point in time that we were given a budget and schedule. We delivered it within budget and on schedule. Now, remember, that's the third or fourth schedule and the third or fourth budget that the bridge project had. But this opportunity to have a joint venture relationship we thought was very important. And we're applying that now in the region to major mega projects. We're really trying to develop committees and partnerships that are broader than just the team that's delivering the project. And we find that to be one of the strongest lessons that we've learned in the Bay Area, is really bring in much more firepower to the discussion. Make sure you have some independent thought, that you're really challenging the risk management strategies that are required to really meet the public commitment of delivering mega projects on time and on budget. And that obviously is a challenge for us in the Bay Area, and it's a challenge around the nation. But we learned a lot of lessons in finishing out that project that we want to continue to apply going forward, because the plan is to continue to develop some pretty major projects, mostly in transit, but in projects that do require a lot of public trust.
Andy, you've talked about decline in ridership of transit. Benton Tempest has a question. Do you foresee reducing the mass transit footprint if ridership continues its low volumes? And how complicated would that be to do?
Yeah, that's a tough one, Benton. No, there's really no plan, I think, to walk away from transit. I think what we're seeing, even in the BART lines today, is they're getting quite a bit more people back, both in express bus and in the BART train that really is the heart of our transit system. We are seeing ridership tick back up, and we do think it's going to come back gradually. We think all the transit operators are working hard at trying to make sure that the system is safe for people to travel on. I think we've all been reading about studies that maybe implicated transit too early into the problem statement and maybe not recognizing the opportunity for it as a solution. We just are not in a position in the San Francisco Bay Area to build more highways or to go back to single occupancy requirements. The clean air requirements of our state and federal laws the need to move 7 million people around the Bay, the inability or unwillingness in my position to really expand the highway system and take away from what is our gem, the San Francisco Bay itself, is just not going to happen. So we need to continue to work on these alternative sources of transportation, like transit, like carpools. And frankly, I mentioned a couple times, but we do think that the e-bike is a game changer. And in particular, maybe it doesn't work so well in Colorado, Benton, but in the Bay Area, we get pretty good weather most of the year, and people are willing to really get out on bikes and move around the Bay Area in significant distances. It's really interesting to take a look at the footprint of an e-bike versus a classic bike and see how much more of a reach, both geographically and in terms of the citizenry, in terms of what they can do. So no, we're going to continue to supplement mass transit. We're going to continue to look for alternative modes of transportation that keep us viable in this current environment without going back to the single occupancy vehicle.
Another question, Andy, from Paul Steinberg. He asks about express lanes. You're in charge of the express lane network, and he wants to know about expansion there, as well as implementation of congestion charging.
Well, Paul, that's a good one too. These are great questions. We are embarking heavily on an investment in what we're calling really a bus and high occupancy toll network. We have an incomplete system of high occupancy vehicle lanes in the Bay Area. If you kind of take a broad brush, there's about 800 miles of freeway in the Bay Area, and we've got about 500 miles of HOV lanes. And the way they were built left a checkerboard of gaps. And so we are focusing first on trying to fill those gaps within the urban core, but also try to deal with the impact of what we call the mega region. As you move north, you get into the Sacramento Valley. As you move east, you get into the valley, the Central Valley itself. As you go south, you get into the peninsula of Monterey and Santa Cruz. And all of those mega regions are also stretching us in terms of the commute patterns and the business and travel patterns. So our game plan is to complete that network as best we can and invest in it, but invest in a way that will support mass transit. And what we're trying to do is create a footprint, a rubber-tired guideway for express bus services that can traverse the whole system, and then of course use the revenue that's generated by the single occupancy or by the carpools and clean air vehicles, which will get a discount, to really keep us operating well and hopefully expanding somewhat. You know, it's a very unreliable fund source. That's the problem. When we did have the pandemic, we turned off all of our lanes. I've mentioned a couple times today the difficulties we have in governance. There's my pal George in the background, so you've now met George. But the governance challenges are also part of the problem. You know, we have 6 different operators in the toll environment, and coming up with policies voluntarily that are similar or the same so that the public isn't confused is challenging. Currently, with the budget constraints that we have, the ability to look forward has been thwarted quite a bit. But our game plan is to complete that express lane network and hopefully continue to modernize it so that we're not investing in big civil infrastructure in the future. But that is our plan, Paul, so stay tuned.
Now, Andy, it isn't all tolls and bridges and clipper cars and express lanes in your life. You're married, you're a family man. I understand you keep chickens in your yard for fresh eggs, and you're thinking about becoming a beekeeper. So tell us a little bit more about the human side of Andy Fremier and this farmer who works for Connie.
Thanks for that, Pat. Yeah, I'm definitely the farm hand. I'm not the instigator. I schlep around. But yeah, you know, this pandemic has actually been pretty interesting. You know, in terms of our demographic, I live in Marin County, which is pretty affluent, and we've had it pretty well in terms of being able to really do business while we stay at home. But not commuting every day, for me, is about a 3-hour savings in time. And it really, I think, gives you an opportunity to really reflect on, you know, how you manage your existence in this world we live in. And so being able to take the opportunity to kind of till the land a little bit with chickens and vegetables and hopefully bees, we find it very relaxing and very rewarding. It's also been nice too, because my older daughter has come home and she's working from home right now, and we have a chance to I don't know, I guess communicate as a family in a way that you don't necessarily get to when your kids do grow up and move out. Sometimes they come back for other reasons, but voluntary reasons are kind of nice. And so we've had 90 plus days of 3 of our 4 unit family, and my son comes around to socially distance in the backyard every so often on the weekends. And it's been actually a really nice experience. I almost feel guilty how nice it's been to not schluck your way into San Francisco every day on a Golden Gate ferry.
Andy, we're just going to pause a minute while I promote a couple of things. First of all, I want to encourage everybody to register for the Maintenance, Engineering, and Roadway Operations Workshop that is going to take place virtually July 12 through 14. Soon, or perhaps today, you'll be able to register on the website. You cannot beat the price. It's free to members. It's $150 for non-members. We have 10 hours of amazing programming that includes webinars and meetups. And the closing session that I'm going to moderate on July 14th is titled Mapping the New and Improved Toll Facility. You don't want to miss it. The panelists are Chris Tomlinson with the State Road and Tollway Authority in Georgia, Mark Compton with the Pennsylvania Turnpike, Diane Scacchetti with New Jersey DOT, Andy Fremier, our guest today from BATA, Mark Muriello with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and Farzan Ahmed with the Ohio Turnpike. So please join us for the maintenance workshop. Also, the deadline for the Toll Excellence Awards is July 1st. The judges are encouraging everyone to consider submitting programs or projects that reflect efforts to mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic as part of the 6 categories. This could be your year to win. Next week, my guest on Café IBTTA is James Hoffman. He's the Executive Director of the North Texas Tollway Authority, Chair of IBTTA's Emerging Technologies Committee, and also a board member of IBTTA. And on July 6th, we have a special webinar called Part 2, Bias, See It, Say It, Stop It, featuring nationally recognized diversity expert Tracy Brown. This is part 2 of a training session that Tracy delivered for the Women in Tolling group on June 1. Andy, it has been fabulous having you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, viewers. Please be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks, everybody.